At my 8-year-old daughter's birthday, no one showed up because my sister sent fake messages pretending to be me, saying it was canceled. My parents took her side and didn't even wish my daughter a happy birthday. I didn't cry. I did this. The next day, they were the ones screaming in a panic. My name's Mila Davenport. I'm 34 years old. The apartment smelled like sugar and cardboard, the perfect scent for the night before my daughter's 8th birthday. Quinn, my daughter, was already asleep, her small form a peaceful lump under a galaxy print duvet, no doubt dreaming of the constellations and planets she'd insisted on for her party theme. I stood in our small living room, the glow from the kitchen light spilling across the floor, and felt a surge of love so fierce it was almost painful. Everything was for her. I reached out and gently adjusted one of the 15 hand-lettered invitations I'd propped on the mantelpiece. Each one was a testament to her excitement, the letters a little wobbly, the stars drawn in silver glitter pen. Beside them, ready for the morning, were the favor bags she'd packed herself, each one bulging with stardust slime, astronaut ice cream, and a tiny glow-in-the-dark moon. She'd spent hours on them, her tongue sticking out in concentration. My husband, Evan Davenport, came in from the bedroom, his footsteps soft on the old hardwood floor. He wrapped his arms around my waist from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. "You always go above and beyond, you know that," he murmured, his voice warm and sleepy. I leaned back into him, a small, tired smile on my face. It's her 8th birthday. It's a big deal, but even in the quiet warmth of our home, a familiar tension coiled in my stomach. I thought about the call with my mom earlier that day. Her voice had been tight, clipped when I'd confirmed that my nephew Caleb Cole wasn't on the guest list. "It's Quinn's day," I'd said, trying to keep my own voice steady and reasonable, "and he hasn't been very kind to her lately." The silence on her end had been a judgment in itself. I glanced at our worn-out couch, the springs starting to give, then thought of the new roof going onto my parents' house, a massive project with new siding to match that I was quietly funding. It was easier to fix the cracks in their house than the ones in our relationship. It was always easier to just pay for peace. 3 o'clock came and went. The doorbell never rang. The silence in our apartment was louder than any noise I'd ever heard. Quinn sat on the living room floor, her beautiful galaxy-themed party dress starting to wilt, a single silver balloon clutched in her hand. She spun it slowly by its string, her eyes fixed on the front door, her face a perfect mask of confusion. The vibrant, excited little girl from this morning had vanished, replaced by a quiet, questioning shadow. By 3:30, her lower lip began to tremble. "Did I put the wrong time, Mommy?" she asked, her voice small and shaky. I walked over and knelt beside her, smoothing her hair. "No, sweetie. The time is right." I checked the invitation on the mantel again, my heart pounding a frantic, useless rhythm against my ribs. 3 o'clock, clear as day. I pulled out my phone, my thumbs shaking as I sent a message to the parent group chat. "Hey everyone, we're here and ready for you. Hope to see you all soon." I added a little party popper emoji, a desperate attempt at normalcy. The replies were a slow, confusing trickle. "So sorry we can't make it," one said. "Hope you guys have fun anyway," said another. No explanations, just polite, vague declines. Evan, my husband, tried to distract Quinn with a game of Go Fish, his smile so strained it looked like it might crack his face. The tower of uneaten pizza grew cold on the counter, a greasy monument to our failure. Then my phone buzzed with a new text, this one from a private number. It was my sister, Brianna Cole. "Heard the party's a bust. Bummer." Roman 20, that XX sign-off. She put it on everything. It was her signature, her brand. And seeing it then in that silent, empty room felt like a slap. At 4 o'clock, my phone rang. I snatched it up, hoping for a parent running late, a plausible excuse, anything. It was Megan Parker, one of the moms from school, and her voice was full of genuine sympathy. "Mila, I'm so sorry about Quinn. I really hope her fever breaks soon. We were all so disappointed to miss it." I froze, the phone feeling slick in my hand. "Fever? She's fine, Megan. What are you talking about?" The room seemed to tilt on its axis. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "The text you sent this morning," she said, sounding hesitant now. "The cancellation, you said she was sick and you'd have to reschedule." My blood ran cold. The air left my lungs in a silent whoosh. "Megan, I didn't send any text, I swear." "But it came from your number," she said, her confusion mirroring my own dawning horror. "It said, 'So sorry to do this, but Quinn's woken up with a fever. We have to cancel. We'll let you know when we reschedule.'" The typo hit me first, a small, glaring error that screamed the truth. Quinn's, without an apostrophe. I never, ever missed the apostrophe, but Brianna did, always. In every text, every social media comment, every birthday card, it was as much her signature as the double X. It all clicked into place with sickening clarity. The school communication thread Brianna had briefly been on last year before Caleb was moved to a different class. She must have scraped the numbers. She had planned this. I immediately sent a blast to the entire parent group, my fingers flying across the screen. "Urgent, a fake cancellation text was sent from my number. The party is on. Quinn is not sick. Please come if you can." The desperation felt raw and humiliating. A few parents, like Megan, immediately understood and rushed over, bringing their kids and late-arriving gifts. They were good people caught in the crossfire of a family war they knew nothing about. 4 kids and 3 parents, not the 15 Quinn had so carefully written invitations for. The apartment, which had felt so full of promise just hours before, now seemed cavernously empty. They sang happy birthday in a small, brave chorus, but their voices couldn't fill the silence. Quinn stared at the 8 candles flickering on her galaxy cake, her face pale and still. She blew them out in one quick, efficient breath, but her eyes were empty. She didn't make a wish. You can't make a wish when your heart is already broken. I excused myself and stepped into the hallway, leaning my forehead against the cool, painted wall. I couldn't breathe. The injustice of it was a physical weight pressing down on my chest, stealing my air. I had tried so hard to protect her, to give her this one perfect day, and my own family had destroyed it with a few taps on a screen. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my recent calls and texts. Nothing, not a single message from my parents, Elaine and Victor Davenport, not another word from Brianna. They knew, of course they knew. This wasn't just about a party. It was a message, sent loud and clear. "You are not one of us, and we will hurt you through your child." The confrontation I'd been avoiding my whole life was no longer optional. I had to go to them. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house alone. Evan had offered to come, his face tight with a protective anger that matched my own, but I told him no. This was something I had to do myself. This was a conversation 34 years in the making. The whole way there, a 20-minute drive through quiet suburban streets, I rehearsed what I would say. I practiced keeping my voice even, my hands steady on the wheel. I wouldn't yell. I wouldn't cry. I would be calm, direct, and unmovable. My mind kept replaying a highlight reel of all the other times I'd let things slide. The forgotten birthdays that just happened to coincide with one of Brianna's minor dramas. The constant, casual comments about my adoption, little reminders that I was the one they'd chosen, not the one they'd made. The endless stream of financial emergencies that only I seemed capable of solving. Each memory was a small cut, and I realized with a startling clarity that I was covered in scars. I pulled up to the house I grew up in. It looked different now. The new vinyl siding, a soft gray I'd picked out with my mom, was only half finished. A large blue tarp was stretched over a section of the roof, held down with sandbags. It was an ugly, unfinished mess, and every square foot of it was being paid for by me. It was supposed to be a gift, a way to show them I cared, to make their lives easier. Looking at it now, it just felt like the price of admission to a family that still treated me like a guest. Then I saw it. Brianna's sporty little coupe was parked in the driveway. Of course. They were already assembled, a united front ready to manage the fallout, ready to manage me. I took one long, deep breath, the clean scent of the car's air freshener doing nothing to calm the storm inside me. This was it. This was the last time I would ever come to this house asking for basic human decency. My goal was simple. I wanted an acknowledgement of what happened. I wanted an apology for Quinn. I knew, even as I formed the thought, that it was a long shot. The obstacle was already inside, drinking coffee at the familiar kitchen table, their story already written, their denials polished and ready. I walked in without knocking, the way I had 1,000 times before. The sound of the screen door slapping shut behind me was unnaturally loud in the sudden quiet. They were all there, just as I'd pictured, sitting at the round oak table in the kitchen. My mom, Elaine, my dad, Victor, and Brianna, 3 cups of coffee, a plate of store-bought muffins between them. A cozy little family meeting. They all looked up, their faces arranged in masks of mild surprise. Mila. What a surprise, my mom said, her smile brittle, not reaching her eyes. She made a move to get up, to offer me a cup, but I held up a hand. I didn't sit down. I stood in the doorway, forcing them to look up at me. Why didn't you come to Quinn's party yesterday? Why didn't you even call? My dad scoffed into his coffee cup. We heard you canceled it, he said, his tone casual, dismissive. I didn't cancel it, I said. My voice was dangerously quiet, and the control I had to exert to keep it that way made my muscles ache. Someone sent fake texts from my number telling everyone it was canceled. I looked directly at Brianna. She picked up her mug, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the ceramic, and took a long, slow sip, refusing to meet my gaze. Well, that's a terrible shame, my mom said, getting up to fuss with the curtains, turning her back on me. But honestly, Mila, what did you expect? You deliberately excluded your nephew, your own flesh and blood. I excluded a bully, I corrected, my voice sharp now. Caleb has been making Quinn miserable for months. There was a hallway game that left her in tears. I'm her mother. I put my daughter first. You humiliated family, my dad's voice rose, his face turning ruddy. That's what you do. You make these little dramas, blow everything out of proportion, and then expect everyone else to fall in line. It's selfish. There it was, the familiar script. It wasn't their cruelty that was the problem, it was my reaction to it. It was my fault. It was always somehow my fault. I turned my attention back to my sister. The other 2 were just her backup singers. She was the one holding the microphone. Did you send those texts, Brianna? She finally looked at me, her eyes wide with a practiced theatrical innocence. Why would I ever do something like that? She asked, her voice laced with manufactured hurt. That's a crazy accusation, Mila, even for you. Because you were angry about Caleb not being invited, I said, ticking the reasons off on my fingers. Because you always type Quinn's without an apostrophe. Because you texted me bummer right when the party was supposed to be starting. Each point landed in the quiet kitchen with a thud. My mom stepped between us, physically blocking my view of Brianna. That is enough, she snapped, her face a mask of indignation. You come into our house after everything we've done for you, and you accuse your sister of something so vile. You were always so dramatic. The word dramatic was the knife they always used, the one they twisted to dismiss my feelings, to invalidate my reality. It was their get out of jail free card for any cruelty they dished out. I looked past her at the 3 of them, my accuser, her defender, and the silent, complicit man I called Dad. So that's it, none of you will take any responsibility for a ruined party. For a heartbroken little girl, she'll get over it, Brianna muttered from behind Mom's shoulder. Kids are resilient. I stood there for a long moment just looking at their faces, the anger, the defiance, the complete and utter lack of remorse. And in that moment, the final piece of a puzzle I'd been working on my whole life clicked into place. They would never change. They didn't want to. I had spent my entire adult life trying to fix them, to please them, to earn a love that was never really on the table. The illusion was gone. My tactic of appealing to their better nature had failed completely because it assumed they had won. I didn't say another word. I just turned around and walked out the door, the sound of it closing behind me feeling like the final page of a very long, very sad book. I didn't drive straight home. I couldn't. My vision was blurry and the familiar streets looked alien and strange. I pulled over into the parking lot of a closed-down department store a few blocks away and just sat there, the engine ticking as it cooled. My hands were perfectly steady on the steering wheel. The grief and anger I'd felt in their kitchen had burned away, leaving something cold and hard and clear in its place. The time for begging for scraps of decency was over. I picked up my phone. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for Henry Collins, the general contractor who was overseeing the renovation on my parents' house. He was a good man, honest and hardworking. He answered on the second ring, his voice cheerful. "Mila, just about to order the shingles for the south side of the roof." "Henry, stop," I said, and my voice was so flat and devoid of emotion it barely sounded like my own. "Stop all work on the house immediately. The project is terminated." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Terminated, Mila, we're halfway through the siding. The roof is exposed." "Is everything okay?" "I am no longer funding the project," I stated simply. There was no need for explanation, no room for negotiation. "Please send me the final bill for all work and materials used to date." "I'll pay it today." He was confused. I could hear it in his voice, but he was a professional. "Okay, Mila, whatever you say." One tie severed. It was surprisingly easy. I ended the call and felt a strange, unfamiliar lightness spread through my chest. I wasn't fixing their house anymore. I wasn't fixing their problems. I wasn't fixing them. Next, I opened my banking app, my fingers moving with a new, decisive purpose. I found the recurring monthly payment I'd set up 3 years ago. The description read, "Mom and Dad Utilities, $428 every single month like clockwork." With a single, satisfying tap on the screen, I canceled the Autopay. Then I scrolled further down my list of accounts. The premium I paid to keep them on my upgraded family health plan. It took a few more taps to navigate the insurance portal, but soon enough they were removed. Then I opened my messages. I typed out a new text to Brianna. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. "This is a formal demand for repayment of the $6,000 personal loan I made to you on May 12th of last year for your car repairs." I made sure to be specific, to leave no wiggle room. "You have 14 calendar days to repay the full amount. If it is not repaid by then, I will be filing a claim against you in small claims court." I hit send before I could second guess it. The progress felt real, solid, like laying the first bricks of a very high wall. I didn't realize then how quickly they'd start looking for a new door to kick down. The blowback was a digital firestorm. A barrage of texts and voicemails flooded my phone over the next 48 hours. They came in predictable cycles, first pleading and confusion from my mom, then angry, entitled demands from my dad. Finally, vicious, blaming messages from both of them accusing me of trying to destroy the family. I didn't listen to a single voicemail. I didn't read a single text. I just blocked their numbers one by one. The silence that followed was a relief. 2 days later, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. It was Quinn's school. My stomach clenched. It was the principal, a calm, kind man named Martin Blake. "Mrs. Davenport, I'm calling about a small incident that occurred during afternoon pickup just now. Nothing to be alarmed about, but I wanted you to be aware." He explained that my parents, Elaine and Victor, had shown up and tried to take Quinn home. The teacher on duty, following protocol, had correctly told them they weren't on the authorized pickup list. My mom, he said, had caused a scene, loudly insisting they were her grandparents and had every right to see her. They'd eventually been asked to leave the school office, but not before they'd gone around to the playground fence and handed Quinn a boxed doll. With it was a note. My blood ran cold as Mr. Blake read it to me over the phone. "We love you so much, sweetie, even if your mommy is making things very difficult right now. None of this is your fault." The manipulation was so blatant, so breathtakingly cruel, it felt like a punch to the gut. They were using my daughter as a pawn, a tiny messenger in their twisted game. I was at the school within 15 minutes, my heart hammering against my ribs. I walked straight into Martin Blake's office. He stood up as I entered, his expression one of professional concern. I am so sorry you had to deal with that, Mrs. Davenport. Thank you, I said, my voice tight. I want them formally added to a do not pick up list. A do not contact list. They are not to have access to her on school property, ever. He was already typing on his computer, his brow furrowed. Of course, consider it done. We'll flag her file immediately and brief all the yard duty staff. On my way out, my mind racing, I saw Nora Patel, a neighbor whose son was in Quinn's class. An idea sparked. I remembered her telling me a month ago that she'd seen Caleb push Quinn hard in the hallway after school. At the time, I'd tried to handle it by talking to Brianna, who had laughed it off. Now, I walked over to Nora. Nora, I know this is a strange request, but do you remember telling me about what you saw Caleb do to Quinn a while back? She nodded, her expression immediately sympathetic. Of course I do. That boy is a menace and his mother just acts like it's a joke. Would you be willing, I asked, my voice low, to write down exactly what you saw, just a short statement with the date? She didn't hesitate. Absolutely. I'll email it to you tonight. Driving home, I realized this wasn't just about protecting Quinn from my parents anymore. It was about protecting her from their entire toxic ecosystem. It was a pattern of entitlement and aggression that started with them and trickled right down to their grandson. The stakes were no longer about my hurt feelings or their lack of respect. They were about Quinn's physical and emotional safety. That evening, as I was tucking a very quiet Quinn into bed, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Megan Parker, the mom who had been the first to call me on the day of the party. Mila, I still feel so terrible about what happened to Quinn's birthday, she wrote. I was looking through my old texts to clear some space and I found the original cancellation message. I don't know why, but I thought you might want it for some reason. Attached to her message was a screenshot. My heart started to hammer in my chest as I downloaded the image. There it was, in a sterile-looking green bubble. The message was exactly as she described it. So sorry to do this, but Quinn's woken up with a fever. We have to cancel. We'll let you know when we reschedule. But as my eyes scanned to the very end of the message, I saw it. I saw what I had missed before, what Megan wouldn't have known to look for. Tucked right after the last word was a single, tiny unicorn emoji, followed immediately by her signature, Roman 20. Brianna used that exact combination on every single social media post, every gushing comment, every text. It was her digital fingerprint, as unique and undeniable as the one on her own hand. This was it. This was the first piece of hard, tangible proof. It wasn't just my word against hers anymore. I saved the image to my phone, emailed it to myself, and uploaded it to a secure cloud drive. This wasn't just a screenshot. It was ammunition. The next morning, as if the universe was determined to arm me for the war I was now in, Henry Collins, the contractor, called me back. Mila, I have that final invoice for you, he said, his voice professional. But I need to ask you something. I feel a little strange about it, but I think you should know. He sounded uncomfortable and I braced myself. What is it, Henry? Your mother called me yesterday afternoon. She was irate. Screaming about me abandoning the job, but in the middle of it all, she also mentioned something about the kitchen refresh. I was completely confused. What kitchen refresh? We never discussed renovating the kitchen. Exactly, he said, and I could hear the relief in his voice. A few weeks ago, she cornered me on site and tried to get me to add a full kitchen gut and remodel to the job. New cabinets, granite countertops, the works. It was going to be another $9,200. My jaw dropped. I told her I couldn't possibly do that without your signature on a formal change order. She told me not to worry about it, that she wanted it to be a surprise for you and that you just keep paying the invoices like you always do. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it was staggering. They weren't just dependent on my money, they were actively and secretly trying to defraud me. This wasn't just about disrespect anymore. This was calculated financial exploitation. The new information from Henry, the premeditated attempt to tack on a nearly $10,000 renovation behind my back, settled like ice in my veins. Any lingering wisp of doubt, any thought that maybe I was overreacting, evaporated completely. There was no going back from this. This was a scorched earth situation. I called Evan at work and told him everything, the undeniable proof in the screenshot, the attempted kitchen add-on, the horrifying incident at the school. I laid it all out, my voice cold and steady. His response was immediate and absolute. "That's it," he said, his voice low and furious. "We're done being defensive. We're done reacting to their crazy. It's time to build a legal fortress around our family." He was right. I had spent my whole life reacting to their whims, their emergencies, their cruelty. It was time to get ahead of them. I spent the rest of the afternoon at our small dining table, transforming our life into a paper trail. I created a meticulous timeline of events, starting with the planning for Quinn's party. I attached the screenshot from Megan. I wrote a detailed summary of my conversation with Henry Collins. I printed out the written statement my neighbor Nora Patel had emailed me about Caleb's bullying. I carefully smoothed out the crumpled, manipulative note my parents had given Quinn at school and scanned it. Every piece of paper, every digital file was another brick in the wall I was building around my daughter. This was no longer a family squabble, it was a documented harassment campaign. My old approach, the one I had learned in childhood, was to absorb the blows, to placate, to pay for peace. That strategy had failed spectacularly. It had only taught them that they could get away with anything. My new approach would be to document, to formalize, to enforce boundaries with the full weight of the system. I was no longer a peacemaker, I was a record keeper. The biggest ticking clock was Brianna's loan. The 14-day deadline I'd given her was now just 9 days away. I knew with absolute certainty that she wouldn't pay it. She would see my demand as just another part of the drama I was creating. The court filing would be my next, very public move, but I also realized I was in over my head. This was escalating far beyond what I could handle on my own with a banking app and a strong will. I needed a professional. That evening, on the recommendation of Evan's parents, who were horrified but unshakably supportive, I made an appointment with a local attorney named Laura Chen. I was committing to a new, more aggressive path, and I had no idea where it would lead. It was a Friday evening, a week after the disastrous party. Evan was in the kitchen, humming along to the radio while he cooked dinner. The smell of garlic and tomatoes filled our small apartment. Quinn was sitting at the table, focused on her math homework, her brow furrowed in concentration. For the first time in days, the house felt calm, a small pocket of peace in the middle of a storm. Then, a sharp, official-sounding knock echoed from the front door. It wasn't the friendly rap of a neighbor or the thud of a delivery. It was a knock that demanded to be answered. I exchanged a confused look with Evan and went to open it. A woman in a neat navy blazer stood on our welcome mat. She offered a kind, almost apologetic smile. "Mila Davenport?" she asked. I nodded. "My name is Dana Ortiz. I'm a caseworker with Child Protective Services." The floor fell out from under me. The air rushed from my lungs. Every nightmare I could have possibly imagined, every fear about being a good enough mother, every insecurity about my fragile little family converged in that one terrifying moment on my doorstep. She must have seen the blood drain from my face because her expression softened. "I am so very sorry to bother you at this hour. We received an anonymous complaint, and by law, we have to follow up with a home visit within 24 hours. Evan was suddenly beside me, his hand finding the small of my back, a solid, grounding presence. And in that instant, a major, undeniable truth hit me. They had crossed the ultimate line. This was no longer about a party or a loan or a leaky roof. This was a calculated, vicious attempt to take my child away from me. We let her in. My mind was screaming 1,000 things at once, but my body went into a strange, detached autopilot. Be calm, be cooperative, do not give them anything. Dana Ortiz was professional and gentle, explaining the process in a calm, steady voice that did little to soothe the panic clawing at my throat. She needed to see the house, she said, speak to Quinn alone for a few minutes, and then ask us some questions. She walked slowly through our small, clean apartment. She saw the tidy living room, the stocked pantry, the colorful, chaotic artwork taped to the refrigerator. She asked to see Quinn's room. It was tidy, just as she'd left it, with a bookshelf overflowing with stories and a small telescope pointed hopefully at the night sky. The complaint, Dana read from her notepad: alleged neglect, an unstable living environment, and ongoing emotional abuse by the mother. The phrases were chillingly, sickeningly familiar. They were lifted, almost word for word, from an old, hateful email my mom had sent me years ago during a nasty argument. She had saved those words, kept them like poison darts, waiting for the right moment to use them. This was my mother's voice, weaponized by the state, aimed directly at my heart. Dana asked if she could speak with Quinn alone in her room, with the door slightly ajar. It was the hardest yes I have ever had to say. Watching my 8-year-old daughter walk into her bedroom with a government official felt like a profound failure, like the world had broken in a way I could never fix. Evan and I sat at the kitchen table in absolute silence, the ticking of the clock on the wall sounding like hammer blows. We could hear the low murmur of their voices, the gentle cadence of Dana's questions, and the clear, piping tone of Quinn's answers. It was the longest 10 minutes of my entire life. When they finally came out, Quinn was smiling. She was holding a shiny sticker Dana had given her, a cartoon puppy wearing a superhero cape. Dana looked at us, her professional mask replaced by a look of genuine warmth. "She's a wonderful kid," she said, closing her notebook. "She's bright, she's happy, and she is very well spoken." She told us Quinn had chattered on about her friends at school, her upcoming science project on volcanoes, and how much she loved it when her dad made pancake faces for her on Saturday mornings. When Dana had asked her if she felt safe at home, Quinn had apparently looked at her like it was the silliest question in the world. "Yes," she'd said, "my mom and dad are my team." The relief was so immense, so total, that it almost buckled my knees. My daughter, in her simple 8-year-old honesty, had been my greatest and most powerful defender. Dana packed up her things. "I see no evidence whatsoever to support this complaint," she said, her voice firm. "My report will reflect that. The case will be closed." After Dana Ortiz left, after the door was locked and the chain was drawn, I broke down. The terror and the white-hot rage I'd been holding back since she'd introduced herself came pouring out in ragged, ugly sobs. Evan just held me, letting me cry it all out against his chest. When I finally quieted, he looked at me, his own eyes shining with a cold fury. "We're not letting this go, Mila," he whispered. "This isn't a fight anymore. This is war." The personal cost of this war was suddenly crystal clear. The fantasy that I could ever have a normal, healthy relationship with the family who raised me was dead and buried. I had to mourn that loss right here and now, and then I had to move on. My goal was no longer just to get them to leave me alone. It was to build a legal wall so high and so thick that they could never, ever touch my daughter again. The next morning, I was sitting in the quiet, tastefully decorated office of Laura Chen, the attorney. I didn't just bring her the evidence about the party, the loan, or the contractor. I brought her the fresh, raw wound of the Child Protective Services visit. I told her everything from the beginning, my voice gaining strength with each documented betrayal. Her expression grew more and more grim as I spoke. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. "This is a classic pattern of harassment and malicious reporting," she said, her voice crisp and certain. "They're escalating because you cut off their financial supply and pushed back. We have more than enough here to act decisively." I looked at her, the fear from last night solidifying into something new, resolve. I made the irreversible choice. "Do it," I said. "File whatever you need to, no more contact. No more mercy." Laura Chen moved with an efficiency that was both terrifying and deeply comforting. Within 48 hours, she had drafted and sent formal no-contact notices to my parents and to Brianna. They were delivered via certified mail, requiring a signature, so there would be no claiming they hadn't received them. The language was simple, direct, and brutal. It ordered them to cease any and all forms of contact with me, Evan, and especially with Quinn. It specifically mentioned phone calls, texts, emails, social media, and any attempts to approach us in person. It also referenced the incident at the school and the false report to Child Protective Services as documented grounds for further legal action, including a restraining order if the harassment continued. Laura also filed a formal police report about the malicious call. She warned me that proving who made an anonymous call was nearly impossible, but filing the report created an official paper trail. It was another brick in our wall. For the first few days after the notices were delivered, there was nothing but silence. No angry calls, no pleading texts. It was an unnerving quiet, the kind of stillness that comes before a storm. I knew it wasn't surrender, it was the deep breath before the plunge. Evan and I sat down with Quinn and explained in the simplest terms we could that Grandma and Grandpa and Aunt Brianna were on a timeout for not being kind. We told her that sometimes adults make bad choices and need space to think about them. She just nodded, her expression serious. "Okay," she said, "so they won't be at my next birthday?" The question was so simple, so final. It broke my heart all over again. The retaliation, when it came, wasn't a frontal assault. It was an insidious, indirect attack designed to isolate me. My Aunt Carol, my dad's sister, called me. She had always been the Switzerland of the family, the neutral one who stayed out of the drama. Her voice, usually warm and friendly, was ice cold. "I heard what you're doing to your parents, Mila," she said, no preamble, no hello. "After everything they did for you, taking you in when you had no one." The taking you in was the old dagger, the one they always unsheathed when they wanted to remind me of my place, of my status as an adopted outsider, forever indebted to them for their charity. My parents had called her, of course. They had wept, telling her a carefully edited story where I had cut them off for no reason at all, that I was unstable and vindictive, and that I was trying to poison Quinn against them. They conveniently left out the fake party texts, the ambush at her school, and the anonymous call that brought a stranger into our home to question my fitness as a mother. I tried to explain my side of the story, my voice shaking with a mixture of anger and hurt, but her mind was already made up. "Family is family, Mila," she said, her tone clipped and final. "You don't just throw it away over a little disagreement." She hung up on me before I could respond. I had lost an ally, a safe space in the extended family that I thought I had. The walls were closing in. My Aunt Carol's call was the first ripple. After that, the ripples became waves. Word moved through the family like gossip through a chain of tin cans, fast, loud, and distorted by the time it reached anyone who wasn't in the kitchen when it started. People I hadn't spoken to since high school sent messages about prayer and patience. An old neighbor from down the block, the one whose porch light I used to run past on late nights as a teenager, crossed the grocery aisle like she didn't see me. The fluorescent lights buzzed above the cereal boxes, and I felt her eyes dart to the child at my side and then away. The cashier handed me my change with quick, tight movements, as if she were trying not to get involved in something sharp. Then there were the letters, stamped, polite notes from people who remembered my mom and dad as generous hosts at potlucks. They called me ungrateful. "You don't throw family away," one woman wrote in looping handwriting as if the sentence were carved from scripture. Another messaged on a local community board that a daughter turning on her parents was a tragedy, and people piled on in the comments, as if the whole thing were a drama to be watched from a safe distance. At the church where Brianna still went every Sunday, people I once nodded at with familiarity suddenly clutched their purses when I walked by. A woman who used to babysit me crossed the parking lot without saying hello. When I ran into Mrs. Langley at the thrift store, she gave me a look that felt like judgment incarnate and said, "Praying for you, dear," like a benediction and a verdict at once. The gossip was loudest where I couldn't avoid it. At Quinn's school functions, at the playground, even at the dentist's office. I got messages from parents I thought were neutral, telling me that family stuff was complicated and they'd stay out of it. Megan, who'd become an ally, texted that she hadn't realized how quickly narratives could flip. "People like to pick a side," she warned. "They're picking theirs." It stung in a way that had nothing to do with facts. It was humiliating to be on display, to have my motives questioned in aisles, at potlucks, and behind church doors. The stress wasn't just emotional. Quinn started to feel it even before she could name it. She'd wake from nightmares and come into our bed, her hair smelling of sleep and the pillow indenting her cheek. She'd mutter things in her sleep, little cries that made my skin crawl in the morning. At dinner, she picked at food and confessed once that some kids at school had asked if her grandma was mad at her. She said it like she was reporting something foreign, and I felt rage and shame blur together so sharply it hurt. The quiet spaces of our life felt surveilled. I stopped answering unknown numbers. I let calls go to voicemail and watched my phone light up with missed calls like a provocation. I deactivated my social accounts for a while, knowing Brianna would seize every platform to shape a story I didn't control. The screen felt safer dark. It was a relief in one way and a prison in another, no way to push back, no way to show the plain truth we were living. Evan held me as the world contracted. He was furious in a way that made the apartment tremble, his jaw clenched, his hands heavy on the sink when he washed dishes. He wanted action, wanted to call out every slight, every rumor. I could feel his anger like a coiled animal ready to leap. My anger was quieter, colder. It set into a plan, bud, a calculation. Together we made the house feel smaller, more watchful. Quinn's small laugh became something I guarded with my whole body. And then, as if the universe liked to mix the personal with the criminal, Henry sent me a copy of an email he'd received from Mom 2 months before. It was a short chain, just a few lines, but once I read it, the room tilted. Mom's voice sat on the page like a hand on a scale. The subject line said Project Add-ons. The email itself was breezy, almost flippant. She thanked him for his work, said how excited she was that the house would finally look finished, and then dropped a line that felt like a sucker punch. Don't worry about discussing the budget with Mila, just add it to the invoice. She'll cover it, she always does. The wording was terrible and precise. It wasn't ambiguity or an offhand comment. It was a plan in plain type: add an entire kitchen gut, bill it quietly, assume I'll pay, treat my money like an endless well. I sat there in the dim light of the kitchen, the kettle hissing on the stove like a soft accusation, and felt something inside me tighten into a hard, sure shape. This had never been about kindness or family. It had been an ongoing arithmetic. My generosity counted as an asset to be spent without consent. I forwarded the email to Laura that night and felt less alone. Having it in black and white made the unfairness feel like a thing the world could see, not just my family's private cruelty. It gave me a sense of rightness I hadn't allowed myself to feel before. That feeling was brief because another shock arrived within days. Evan came home with his face stormy like a sky before a squall. He had been called at work by someone who sounded like Dad. The voice on the other end was low and smooth, far removed from the clumsy soapbox barbs Dad usually favored. Listen to me, the man had said. You two need to rethink this. There are people who know folks in your field. A bad word can get around. The words were veiled but clear. We could make trouble for you at your job. We could interfere with the people you work with. Evan had held the phone with white knuckles, the receiver almost bending under his grip. His face had gone a funny pale, like someone had shone bright light under his skin. He told me how Dad had laughed softly, as if issuing a threat in the middle of a family dinner. It was the old leverage again, make you feel small by pointing out you live in a world they can hit in ways you hadn't imagined. I asked Evan if Dad had any real connections. He shrugged, but there was no real comfort in the answer. It didn't matter if the threat had teeth. It mattered that they were willing to try. That willingness was the real weapon. They'd escalated from emotional manipulation into the realm of practical harm, trying to corner our livelihood. That crossed a line I couldn't ignore. The small claims date suddenly felt less like a day to collect $6,000 and more like a battleground where we could lay everything we knew on the table. I called Laura and told her Dad's call, breathless, a little frantic. They're getting angrier, I said, and bloodthirsty. They've broadened their target. Laura answered with that hard, practical tone that made me trust her. "This complicates things," she said, "but it also makes your case stronger. It shows a pattern." I wanted to hammer the point home. This wasn't about money now, not really. It was about showing a judge that this was a deliberate campaign of harassment. She hesitated the way professionals do when they see risk. "Small claims is usually narrow," she warned. "Judges often want the simple contract question, money owed or not. If you bring in all the extra stuff, the judge might see it as spite." I felt my hand go cold, but my voice stayed steady. "We have more than spite, Laura. We have a paper trail. We have a neighbor's statement about a child being bullied, a documented school incident, the police report on a malicious CPS call, the contractor's email about mom's plan, and now a threat to my husband's work. We're not telling a story, we're showing their actions." She took a breath. "It's a risky move, but if you want the court to see the pattern, we'll prepare it cleanly, concise, factual, chronological. No theatrics." We spent the next 2 days building that chronological picture, like putting together a puzzle where every piece pointed at the same face. I gathered the screenshot with the unicorn and Roman 20 and the Quinn's typo. I printed Mr. Blake's report about mom and dad showing up at the school and the awkwardly sweet note they'd left Quinn. I included Nora's statement about Caleb pushing my daughter in the hallway. I scanned Henry's email where mom told him not to talk to me about the kitchen add-on. I copied the police report number for the CPS visit and attached the short summary Dana had given me. I found myself calming as I worked. Sorting the evidence into neat stacks, labeling each packet felt like reclaiming something that had been stolen. It wasn't just about legal victory, it was about truth. The binder grew heavy in my hands, full of things that would stand up in a room where numbers mattered and stories could be held to the light. If the judge asked, the page-by-page record would show the pattern plainly. Laura warned again that the judge might not want the whole backstory. "Keep it tight," she said. "Show them why this loan isn't just an unpaid IOU. Show the harassment as context, not the cause. It was fair." We were threading a narrow needle, trying to use the one neutral place we could still trust to force a reckoning. I slept poorly that night, the binder by the bed like a sleeping animal. When Quinn woke, sun in her hair and a question for breakfast, I smiled and folded the worry back into my chest. The days that followed were a blur of phone calls, quiet preparation, and the choking feeling that this was the only way to make them stop. The timeline was accelerating not because I wanted it to, but because they had left me no other path. Laura agreed. She said it slowly, like she was counting the risk against the need and finding the need heavier. "We'll bring the loan," she told me, "and then we'll show the pattern. Keep it tight, keep it factual." That was the plan. Go in with more than a note that someone owed money. Go in with a timeline, with receipts and screenshots and witness statements, with the little pieces that, when stacked, made the whole picture visible. We spent the next 2 days like soldiers packing for something we couldn't fully imagine. I printed everything twice. I labeled each page and slid them into plastic sleeves. I wrote a 1-page chronology, simple lines, dates, what happened, so a judge could flip through and see the sequence without getting lost in emotion. Laura practiced how she would say it out loud, the way she'd point out the screenshot with the unicorn and XX, the way she'd lay the contractor's email beside the school incident and the police report. She kept telling me, "We don't do storytelling, we do facts." There were moments in those 2 days where I felt ridiculous for taking this so far. The binder on our kitchen table looked like overkill next to Quinn's crayons and a half-finished homework sheet. But each piece was a weight I could hold up when they tried to make me the crazy one. Each document was a little truth I could show without crying. Preparing it calmed me in a way nothing else had. It turned the chaos into a set of clear, usable things. We rehearsed the sequence of events until the words felt mechanical, until they rolled out of me like a worn coin. Laura warned me that judges sometimes didn't like a lot of backstory, so we made the narrative tight and chronological. If the judge only wanted the loan, we'd leave the extras out. If the judge would let us show the pattern, we'd be ready. Either way, I wanted the record to exist. When I put the final tab in the binder and closed it, there was a strange serenity. We'd been pushed into a corner and given no choice, but that corner had yielded a strategy. They'd made this personal and we were making it public. It felt risky, but it felt honest. For the first time since the party, I slept a little that night knowing I had done everything I could to protect Quinn and to make sure the truth would be seen. The night before the court date, the apartment felt smaller than usual. Quinn was asleep with her favorite plush rocket tucked under her arm and her drawing of the solar system at the table waiting for a missing crayon. The binder sat at my place, a heavy, quiet thing that reflected the lamplight. Around it, the evidence for a private war lay in neat stacks: the screenshot, Nora's statement, Henry's email, the school report, the police report. Each sheet was a small betrayal made plain. There were bills, too. Legal work had a cost, and it landed on our kitchen table in black and white. Laura's retainer, the court fees, the small miscellaneous charges for copies and certified mail, numbers that made me run my thumb along the paper like it could erase them. We were spending thousands to get back 6,000, and more important, to make them stop. I watched the numbers dance and felt the old, familiar panic creep in. Was I being stupid? Was there a point where pride became self-harm? I thought about just letting it go. I pictured calling Laura in the morning, saying I couldn't do it, paying the money herself, or in my head, absorbing the loss and retreating into quiet. There was a soft, seductive image of peace where nothing was contested and the worst parts of the family story stayed behind closed doors. It would cost less than this fight. I could buy back silence if I wanted to. The fantasy was comforting and shameful all at once. Turning the pages of the binder, I felt the weight of betrayal again. Each document was a small scar mapped on paper. I felt tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. My fingers trembled a little as I prepared my things for the morning: a thermos of coffee, a spare cardigan, the binder zipped in its case. I breathed and told myself that this cost was the price of not being afraid anymore. That thought made my chest ache, but it steadied my hands. In the quiet of that night, old voices rose up like bad radio. Moms, you were always so dramatic. Dads, we took you in. The chorus had been with me my whole life, an echo I could never quite drown. They were a kind of weather, predictable, draining, and impossible to change. I lay awake and felt those words settle into the place in me they'd always found before. The place that wondered if I belonged, the place that thought everything I did was borrowed and could be taken away. Being adopted had never been a traumatic reveal in our family. It was the background to my childhood. But over the years, it became a bargaining chip against me. I'd been raised with the idea I owed gratitude for having been given a home, and I'd turned that debt into a lifetime of trying to earn endless favors. The wound under all of this was the feeling that I had to be useful to belong, that my worth could be measured by what I gave. At 3 a.m, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table again, staring at the dark window where city lights flickered like distant stars. I thought about every time I'd swallowed my anger to keep the peace, the broken childhood birthdays, the whispered jokes about who I was, the way they treated Brianna's needs like commands and my own like options. I asked myself how much I had paid to quiet those voices. The answer rose from the pages of the binder like a bitter taste, more than I should have been required to. That core wound made me question everything. Maybe I had blown this up. Maybe I'd turned a hurt into a war. The doubt felt like thin ice under my feet, ready to split. I could feel the old shame, a private conviction that I wasn't allowed to be loud, that my anger made me unreasonable, that love always meant giving until there was nothing left of me. And yet, tucked between the doubt and the fear, there was a stubborn, quiet truth. Quinn belonged to me because I chose to be her mother every day. She loved me because of the small things: pancake faces, the telescope by her window, the way I cheered at her spelling tests. No one could argue with that. My core wound may always wobble under pressure, but it didn't erase the facts on the table. It didn't mean I had to accept being treated as expendable. Early that morning, Evan found me at the table, hunched over the binder with circles under his eyes and the creases of worry deep on his forehead. He didn't come in with grand speeches. He set a mug of coffee down beside me and sat. He didn't say we were right or that the world would be fair. He simply opened the binder where I had left it and started pointing. "That screenshot," he said, tapping the phone copy of the cancellation text. "Look at the unicorn and the Roman 20, that's not you." His finger moved to Nora's statement. "She saw Caleb shove Quinn. This isn't just fights and feelings, this is stuff that happened." He flipped to Henry's email. That's calculating, that's not an offhand comment." He paused and looked at me. "You didn't make this up." His voice was steady in a way that quieted the panicked part of me. He didn't have to tell me my feelings were valid. He showed me the facts and let the facts do the talking. When I looked through the binder with him, each piece seemed less like a weapon and more like a record, like a map that led directly to the truth. He said, quietly, "This is the only thing we have that can't be rewritten by gossip or tears. Take that into the room tomorrow. That's yours." The simplicity of it, point to the facts, let them speak, cut through the noise. I felt a fragile hope, the kind you get when you realize you're not alone in holding something heavy. By the time we left the house for the small claims building, I felt steadier. The binder was zipped into its case and my hands were calm. Quinn hugged me in the driveway, her arms small but fierce, and told me to be brave. I told her I would, and I meant it. The small claims courtroom smelled like old paper and coffee, the kind of institutional smell that always made me think of waiting rooms and formal apologies. The walls were beige, the chairs were stiff. People shuffled their papers and avoided the eyes of anyone who might be part of their story. My family had come too. Mom and Dad sat behind Brianna, their faces composed like people going to church, a performance of indignation ready on their lips. Brianna had dressed carefully as if to say she belonged there. She sat with her chin lifted, defiance painted on her jaw. Laura sat on my right with the binder in front of her. I felt the weight of it again, the months of evidence and the nights of fear contained in those pages. I kept my hands folded in my lap and tried to breathe slowly. The judge called our case and the room stilled. We all stood when she entered. She looked like someone who had heard every kind of pleading and could tell truth from flattery by tone alone. Brianna went first. She told the story I'd expected. The money was a gift, not a loan. I was making a stir because I was angry about family issues. This was a misunderstanding blown up by me. Mom dabbed her eyes with a tissue at the right moments, and Dad gave a small, righteous sniff when Brianna talked about family values. Their performance was practiced, polished. Inside me, the old voices tried to rise. "Don't be loud, don't be angry, that's not how this ends." I felt the shake in my chest and turned my attention to the binder, the concrete thing I could hold. I let Laura stand and listen. When it was my turn, I didn't make a speech. I let the binder speak and I let Laura do the rest. When Laura stood, she didn't dramatize. She moved with the confidence of someone who'd done this before and handed the judge our binder like it was a little tidy argument that could be read in an hour. "Your Honor," she said, "the narrow question is whether the defendant owes $6,000. But the surrounding facts speak to a pattern of harassment that explains why my client brought this claim. We ask that the record reflect the whole context." She set the loan message on the table first, the plain text where Brianna had written, "I'll pay you back every penny, I swear." It was short, blunt, the kind of thing you show to prove a debt. Then Laura pulled out the screenshot of the cancellation text. I watched the judge's eyes move across the green bubble. "So sorry to do this, but Quinn's woken up with a fever. We have to cancel. We'll let you know when we reschedule." And then, at the end, a tiny unicorn emoji and Roman 20. The judge's mouth tightened when she looked up at Brianna. Laura didn't stop there. She put 3 printouts of Brianna's public posts next to the screenshot, the same unicorn and Roman 20 ending every one of them. It was small, almost silly, an emoji and 2 letters, but it tied a person to an action. The judge flipped through them, a soft rustle filling the room. Brianna's face had that color-sapped look of someone realizing patterns were visible to other people now. Next, Laura slid over Nora Patel's statement. Nora had written about seeing Caleb push Quinn in a school hallway and described how Brianna had laughed it off when told. The judge read Nora's neat script, then glanced at the typed school incident report. Mr. Blake's report was professional and simple. Mom and Dad had shown up at the school, been told they weren't on the pickup list, and left a note for Quinn. The note itself, photographed and included, was quietly ugly. A sweet ribbon of words wrapped around manipulation. Finally, Laura handed the judge Henry's email. It was short but brutal in its implication. Mom had asked Henry to add a $9,200 kitchen remodel without telling me, and had written, according to Henry, "Don't worry about discussing the budget with Mila. Just add it to the invoice, she'll cover it, she always does." When the judge read that line, I felt my chest unclench a little, like someone had finally said the obvious out loud. Brianna's lawyer objected at every turn, said some of this was irrelevant, but the judge let Laura keep going. Each piece of paper was a small, plain thing. Together they were a picture that didn't fit with the neat story my family had tried to tell. For the first time in a long time, the messy truth was stacked where it could be seen. Laura kept her voice calm and steady. She didn't beg, she pointed at dates and texts and actions. "We're not asking for a moral verdict," she told the judge. "We're asking you to consider why a mother would demand repayment, why she would cut off funding, why she would seek a legal remedy. These documents show a pattern, repeated attempts to take advantage of my client's generosity and to harm her family when she stood up for her child." When it was my turn, I felt no urge to scream the story I'd lived through. I let the evidence sit there and spoke plainly. "This isn't revenge for a party," I said. "It's the record of what happened before and what happened after. It's how my family used my money and then used my child. This binder is all I have to show that I wasn't inventing things to hurt them. I hope you'll believe the paper." Laura closed the binder and looked at me for a second that felt like an ocean. Then she turned back to the judge and left the rest to the courtroom to decide. Laura built the case brick by brick, and the brickwork began to show a shape. She presented the school incident, Nora's witness statement, the police report about the Child Protective Services visit, and Henry's email about the kitchen plan. She didn't pile on adjectives. She let the facts sit next to each other like clean proof, dates, names, and actions aligned. The police report about the anonymous Child Protective Services complaint was short and clinical, but it mattered in the way paper can. Someone had called and said things that matched phrases my mom had used in old emails. Dana Ortiz's visit was in the record. She had written that Quinn was bright and well cared for and that there was no sign of neglect. That neutral, official voice in our favor meant the accusation had already been checked and found empty. That was important. The neighbor's statement about Caleb pushing Quinn put a name to the bullying that had pushed me to disinvite him. It wasn't drama, it was behavior. Laura pointed to Nora's handwriting and Mr. Blake's report and said, "This shows a consistent pattern of conduct that begins with the child and extends upward. It is not isolated." Then she produced Henry's email. That line, "She'll cover it, she always does," sat there like a confession. Laura explained it without flourish. My mom expected me to pay without my permission. She tried to present it as a reasonable request, but on paper it read like a plan. The judge read it twice, lips moving over the sentence. Brianna shifted in her seat. Laura then connected the threatening call made to Evan. She didn't dramatize the call, she described it as an attempt to intimidate him at his workplace to reach his professional life. The judge listened. You could see the room lean in, a family dispute leaking outside the home. Laura's presentation made two things plain. 1, the loan was a debt Brianna had acknowledged. 2, the debt could not be separated from the surrounding harassment. The judge, who'd seen 1,000 human squabbles, had to decide whether to treat this as a simple unpaid loan or as part of a larger campaign that had real harm written all over it. When the judge finally spoke, the room went quiet in a way that felt like holding your breath underwater. She asked Brianna directly if she had sent the cancellation text. Brianna's mouth opened and closed. "No, I don't remember," she stammered, a bad play of uncertainty. The judge's voice was flat but firm. "This is a court of law. Memory is not the same as evidence." Brianna tried to say it had been a joke, an offhand thing, but the judge cut through. "A joke that caused measurable harm," she said, looking at the little girl's empty birthday and the school report. "Miss Cole, you acknowledged a debt to the plaintiff in your messages. The court must rely on the evidence in front of it." She looked over the binder, then at me. For the first time since all of this began, a stranger, an official stranger, told me what my own family had refused to say. "Miss Davenport," she said, "it is clear from these documents that there has been a pattern of harassment. I find for the plaintiff in the sum of $6,000 plus filing costs." The words landed like rain. The judge continued. "Given the context here and the documented attempts to interfere with the plaintiff's parental relationship, I strongly advise that the parties have no further contact. Any further false reports or attempts to intimidate will be treated seriously." Brianna made a small sound like air leaving a balloon, and Mom and Dad looked suddenly much older. There were instructions about how the judgment would be paid, a nod to the court clerk, and then the case was closed. I felt a dizzy, strange relief, the legal part done, the facts on record. I left the building with the paper in my hand. It was an odd, heavy thing to carry, proof and permission at once. On the drive home, I thought about what we had lost and what we'd protected. The money was a finish line, but the judgment meant something else, an official recognition of what they'd done. It did not erase the bruises, but it made them visible in a way that gossip never could. 3 months later, our apartment felt different. Quiet, yes, but not the kind of quiet that hides storms. It was steady, the kind of silence you get when the noise has been removed by choice. Brianna had paid what the court ordered in installments after wage garnishment kicked in. There had been no dramatic scene, no last-second apology. Just numbers moving and a line being drawn. We felt the cost of the fight. The legal bills had taken a bite out of our savings. There were evenings when Evan and I counted the months it would take to rebuild what we'd spent. But every time Quinn laughed at something small, when she announced she'd made a new constellation in her drawing, or when she insisted on pancakes with pancake faces, I knew the cost had been worth it. The half-finished roof at Mom and Dad's house leaked through a winter that felt harsher because of it. Creditors stopped offering leniency, and I heard through Henry that some suppliers had cut them off. I didn't gloat. It was not pleasure I felt at their trouble. It was a quiet satisfaction that consequences finally matched choices. We rebuilt a life that did not include manufactured drama. We started small traditions that belonged to us. Friday pizza nights became a small fortress of normalcy. I helped Quinn with her telescope and taught her how to map the moon. Evan planted a tiny herb garden on our windowsill. We planted new roots in small ways. The best thing wasn't the judgment. It was the people who stepped in to be our village. Megan and her kids, who now came regularly for weekend park playdates. Nora, who became a steady neighbor and friend. Evan's parents, who showed up with casseroles and practical help without strings. Those people chose us in ways that mattered. A few Sundays after the judgment, we threw Quinn a do-over birthday in the backyard at Evan's parents' house. There were no big vendors, no pressure to please distant relatives. A string of lights, a telescope on a blanket, a small bonfire. The cake was a night sky again because she wanted it that way. Quinn ran through the yard holding dandelions like a trophy. She handed me a lopsided bouquet and then looked around at the small circle of people she'd invited. Her face was open and content, not waiting for approval. She came up to me, serious for a minute, and said, "Only our people next time, Mom." I hugged her and felt a peace that was steadier than any celebration. The line I had drawn had been branded as cruel by some, but when it came down to it, it wasn't cruelty. It was protection. It was parenting with a backbone. I had chosen who got to be near her, and in that choice I found a new kind of family. If this story hit home, tell me about the line you drew and who you chose to stand with. Share your story in the comments, and if you want more true-feeling tales about hard choices and quiet revenge, subscribe to hear the next one.